Hello and welcome back to the From My Perspective podcast, where I, Jax McCarty, tell you all the names you need to know in the college football landscape that could change the football landscape in the very near future. So, as you might have noticed, if you're a commonly reoccurring member of this channel, we did not have a Thursday episode. That is absolutely my bad. We were having some technical issues, so that does mean we also don't have any of my predictions to go over. Would you believe it if I told you that the ones I wrote out were pretty accurate? I think I went 7 for 10. I doubt you believe me because that has not been the theme this year, but you're just going to have to take me on my word for it. That said, today we are back to the normal grind here. We're doing my top 10 thoughts from the week before, and as you can probably tell by my shirt, which one is going to start us off. Before we get into any of that, make sure that you hit subscribe. It doesn't really do a whole lot for you. It just helps you find my videos if you're interested in seeing more of them, and it helps me grow the channel. So yeah, as you can tell, I'm an Arkansas dad today. I'm 21 years old. I'm certainly not a father, but I am an Arkansas dad, and I'm a proud dad at that because Arkansas gave LSU a really tough test in their last game. Dare I say the toughest that the offense has faced in quite some time. That said, I can heap a lot of praise on Arkansas like I likely will a little bit later on, but this is the type of win that I think we're going to look back on, and maybe it won't come into play as much in the SEC championship game against Georgia, but I think maybe during their bowl game that we'll be able to look back on this one and say, wow, that's a game that LSU really needed, even though you wouldn't think it. LSU's been flying high since after that Tennessee game. That's really when their hot streak started. The offense has been clicking. The defense has done just enough to win. I know that doesn't sound like the greatest recipe for success, but that's kind of how college football is operated now. As long as you have a high-powered offense, it's pretty hard to find a team that'll have the defense at the level that you need to stop it. Arkansas's defense, though, give them credit. They gave them a lot of issues. Jaden Daniels was in the turf more often than he wasn't. He was getting sacked left, right, and center, and we saw a lot of that play a big impact. He was very limited through the air. He was very limited as a rusher, but that's where you saw other guys step up and really show a lot of follow through and a lot of wanting to win football games, which is what you need to see from teams like this. I mean, Josh Williams and John Emery, I know Emery only had like 3 touches, but between the two of them, I think they hit over 200 yards. So you have to give both of them a lot of credit for being able to kind of spark that offense and really provide the only valuable offense, dare I say, that you saw from LSU all game. Plus, when you flip the script and you look at the defense, they did a better job of stopping Rocket Sanders than you can ask anybody to do on a weekly basis. That's a very tough task. I'll be the first to tell you. I've watched a lot of Rocket Sanders this year. I'm from the state of Arkansas. I'm partially responsible to watch those games. He's a very good running back. LSU did a very good job of handling him and keeping him within a little box there. This is the type of win that I think could really put a fire underneath LSU. I'm not an LSU guy. I'm not a Brian Kelly guy. I'm actively rooting for his downfall. But if he fails at LSU, it will make me feel a little bit better than if he succeeds. I don't know the guy personally, but there's a lot of hearsay, I guess, that kind of leads me in the direction that he might not be the greatest guy on this planet. That said, watching them win this early into his tenure should absolutely be a scary thought for anyone in the SEC, anybody that's an SEC fan, that's not just an overarching SEC fan, because LSU's a great brand to have be really, really good. But, you're watching him week by week figure it out, and, maybe he falls apart whenever he has to recruit in the South. Who knows? But until then, LSU's a pretty good team, and they just got the fire underneath them that I really do think is going to matter whenever these games get a bit more serious. Speaking of serious games, TCU, man, they had Texas. They were the underdogs going into Texas despite being undefeated entering this contest. Texas has had plenty of bumps and bruises along the way, and just the big overarching thing here is that the Horned Frogs do not care about what you think about the Horned Frogs. They go out there every single week. It does not matter what the line is. It does not matter who is across from them. They find a way to win. This week, sneaky thing that we might not have known about really as a collective unit here, their defense might actually have some value to it and be able to cause some damage. I mean, when you look at the numbers, they did a really good job of proving that they are not a one-trick pony. You held Bijan Robinson to 2.4 yards per carry, one of the best running backs in the country, and Quinn Ewers couldn't find any success. They did something great on that football field on Saturday. This is not to say that they're going to beat Georgia or that they'll beat Tennessee or the Big 12 or the Big 10 winner rather. I'm not out here to predict that they are a superpower, but they keep finding these ways to win that defense yet again. And then let's give some shine to Kendry Miller as well. He stepped up at a crucial point and kept things going. Then you look at the end of their schedule, right? You've got to zoom out a little bit and be like, well, you're 2 games out from being undefeated. You know who they've got left on their schedule? They've got Baylor and Iowa State. That sounds pretty winnable to me. They've gotten through all their roadblocks. They've gotten through their barriers. And, I mean, at this point, how are you still doubting them? They have proven to be the absolute cream of the crop. They're the little engine that could, even though that feels so disrespectful to say because there's a ton of talent and real good football players on this roster. There's no limitation of them. There's a lot of guys who step up into their right roles and do exactly what Coach Sonny Dykes needs them to do. They just keep on winning, and it does not matter what your opinion is of them or what my opinion is of them. They just go out there and win. Simple as that. I want to take a trip next to the Pac-12, and we'll take another trip to the Pac-12 soon enough, I'm sure. But, wow. The game I want to talk about here is Oregon versus Washington, and I feel like we got to see Oregon crawling up the board of teams that people like, if you will, the public opinion board, as we'll say here. They were starting to slowly but surely make their way up it. I know a lot of people were still trashing on them for that Georgia game because apparently teams can't improve past 0 week or week 1 or whenever that was. But, they were starting to make their name for themselves until Michael Penix Jr. entered the equation, had another Heisman-level game, and put them on their behinds. Now, I don't want to sit here and try to clown on Oregon because they are mathematically eliminated from the college football playoffs. They are no longer really in contention for any of that. It would be easy to take that road, but I want to look at this more as a Washington win than necessarily an Oregon loss. What happened in that stadium was an anomaly. That's not the type of football game you can expect on any Saturday, I'll tell you that much. That was incredible. Michael Penix Jr., I mentioned his name earlier. He showed why his name's been loosely affiliated with that award. 408 passing yards, 74% clip. He averaged 15.6 yards per completion on the day. That's not something that you see very often, especially considering the fact that they were in Eugene. I don't know what kind of, processing power or brain power he's got, but man, whatever he was doing works, and he needs to start teaching other quarterbacks who are going to travel into Eugene how to do that because, man, that was an incredible showing by him. The running group did what they needed to do and what they were supposed to do to manage and kind of get over that hump. The biggest note that I have from this game, Washington's defense found success in 3 of the 4 quarters play. Of course, I am removing I believe it was 21 from the third quarter that they allowed, but outside of that, they allowed just 13 to an offense that's been incredible, to a Bo Nix that has really revitalized his image and who he is in college football and what he means to this sport. They found a way to keep him kind of tame, all things considered. You won't see results every week like that. That much is certain. I mean, you can't expect stuff like that. That stuff just kind of happens out of sheer luck and grace. And Washington continues this weird pole bounce of in and then out and then in. Maybe they're here to stay this time. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. I did kind of just look at that as a big moment for the Huskies and a big win for Washington, more so than it was an Oregon loss. And now I want to kind of pick up a team that lost because I do feel like they deserve it, and that maybe the way that they lost and how close the game wasn't quite reflective of how good of a team this has been throughout the year, because obviously a loss is a loss. But Ole Miss, they deserve some love. They deserve some flowers. They performed incredible against a team that is still very hard to beat. I don't care what anybody else says about Alabama this year. It's still one of the best teams in the country. They've lost to a couple important teams. That much is simple. LSU and Tennessee are no joke. But yeah, Ole Miss deserves a little bit of respect and a little bit more TLC, if you will. I'm not a moral victories guy, but if you were handing them out, Ole Miss is about as close to one as you can possibly get because you hung in there with the Giant. Even though they're not the Giant of the SEC this year, you still hung in with a team that is always hard to beat against a guy whose staff you've been on, so he absolutely knows your philosophies, and you know his, but he's got more talent on the sidelines because that's what Bama does, Bama is still Bama. That's the thing, You can't expect to go in and beat Bama any week. That can't be the expectation. It doesn't matter if they have, 2 losses. It's still Bama. They're always going to be a problem so long as Coach Saban is around. Kenshawn Judkins, he had a really good game. I know Lane doesn't want to hear that. I listened to the part of the press conference where he eventually was like, I don't care how many yards he got. We didn't win. That's the part that matters. But, he's so young. You got to give him some respect there. And I'm sure Kiffin did do that after the game and be like, look, you played great. But, I wanted to make sure to do it here because he was very, very good. All in all, I think it's been a good year for Lane. And I really, really hope he stays here for it because you hear all these rumors about, well, maybe Nebraska or maybe Auburn or maybe yada, yada, and so on and so forth. Or if this job opens up or maybe the NFL or, you hear so many different things about Lane Kiffin and, potentially leaving. And I know he's got that reputation of, being willing to jump ship if he thinks the opportunity is too big to pass up. He's not afraid. He's not gun shy of that. But, I really hope that he remains at Ole Miss because I really like what he's building. And I've said it a couple times on this podcast. I think he gets to walk right into Tuscaloosa when Nick's done. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see. Okay, so next team I want to talk about, one of those teams that I've mentioned a couple times on the podcast and have been pleasantly surprised with them throughout the year beyond the first week that we saw them. I believe, pick against them that week, and I think that was one of them I got right. But that's too in the weeds right now. We're talking about North Carolina, who I believe could, secretly, don't pay too much attention to it or you're going to ruin the magic, but North Carolina could be the best team in the ACC this year. It's not like Clemson looks all that great. They keep switching out quarterbacks like it's new socks. They keep beating the same teams Clemson's beaten about by the same level of difficulty. A lot of these games against these top-ranked teams are very close, and that's what Clemson was doing. They just got their bubble popped. I get that they have their struggles, talking about the Tar Heels here, specifically on defense, but how are you supposed to match the output by Drake May weekly? I mean, the kid is a Heisman contender if he plays for any other university with a little bit more star power, a little bit more name brand there, because he has just been lighting it up. I mean, he's electric, and he's electric on a weekly basis. He steps up on a weekly basis. Every time he gets on the field, you know that he's going to come out there and do his job, and he's going to do it well. It is a little bit worrying how their scoring slowed against Wake Forest. You could see it slowly chip away, and less success was coming quarter after quarter after quarter, and I get that is a little bit of a red flag, but they showed a lot of poise and managed to keep a hold of it. And plus, when you really look at it overall, how many offenses do you trust to rally back from an early lead? How many offenses can you confidently say, once they get down by a couple scores, have the mental fortitude to rally back in it and, really stay neck and neck. And then you have to worry about Drake May on top of that, trying to pull out once again. So I think that even though, despite they slowed down quite a bit, I'm not ignoring that fact, but it is something that I don't feel necessarily as worried about. They've still got Clemson, most likely in the ACC Conference Championship. I think they've got a little bit of that Clemson grit that I kept talking about earlier in the year. I kept bringing up that they really do a good job of hanging on when it matters and closing the gap and truly shutting it down whenever it needs to be shut down and walking away with a win. They've only lost one game. Drake May's been great. They know how to win games in a very close margin. So Who's to say? Who's to say? When we see Clemson versus North Carolina, I'm not necessarily projecting that North Carolina will win that game, but I am saying that if the line is larger than like, I don't know, 10, 11, 12, which I think it could be because they disrespect the Tar Heels. But, if it is a rather large line, I'm going with North Carolina every day of the week. Okay, so North Carolina was one of those teams coming into the year that I didn't really expect to be much of anything. I knew Drake May was coming in. I wasn't just totally sold on him as far as a prospect because he was just in high school. And now, he's finally getting those starts, or I believe he's a redshirt freshman, actually. But, it hadn't been very long since he was just playing high school ball and was now finally getting his chance in college football. A team that I have liked all year, but haven't really been as vocal about because, they really started working their way back up into the point where you needed to talk about them, was UCF. I just predicted them to win my conference championship not too long ago, and they have not done me wrong since I said it. Keep your eyes peeled because this is a team that is sneaky good and could even make some noise in a bowl game. I've been touting that UCF hype, and it's serving me well. It's another big win against Tulane last week, and now they're at 17th on the poll. They didn't even need to do the Mikey Keene and John Rhys Plumlee thing that I had mentioned, because I said that if you rotate those two and kind of add an extra layer and cause some more issues, that could be kind of the key to winning to Tulane. They didn't even do that. They just rolled out Plumlee, and he did his thing on the ground primarily. He didn't really have much of passing stats to make any note of, but on the ground he was incredible. The only reason I really want to talk about this, because I don't want to get too reflective on that specific game, but don't be surprised if UCF takes on a pretty decent Power 5 team in a bowl game and puts them down, and really shows that this Big 12 move next year is going to be way more interesting for them than maybe we think, because I think a lot of people will, kind of quickly be like, no, these new teams, they take a while to get used to, or, acclimate to their area, whatever. They could absolutely be a problem in the Big 12 if you don't watch your back. Okay. So speaking of the Big 12, since we're already here, why don't we stay a little bit? UCF has a lot of promise, a team that has dropped significantly farther down the pecking order and the depth chart than what I expected at the beginning of the year. I think I had them ranked somewhere in the teens. They are not currently that. Baylor, we're talking about Baylor. They have a real problem on their hands. I just can't locate what it is. It feels like everything might be a problem at this point, which in turn could open up that job. Now let me explain that a little bit more. If Dave Aranda, who a lot of people are getting a lot of respect for, doesn't feel that he has the resources to win here, he doesn't feel like Waco is the place for him, who's to say that, Colorado or Nebraska or, I don't know, pick a school. I'm probably not Auburn, but some of these guys that will be looking for a job, who's to say that they don't give Dave Aranda a call and be like, hey, are you still happy over in Waco? If not, would you be happy over here? I could see that being a legit thing. Blake Shapen hasn't really worked out for them. Their defense hasn't been great. They don't really have much of an offensive chemistry. It just looks like everything is working against the Bears, and maybe I should be a little bit more harsh on Aranda because of that, because obviously he's in charge of the ship, and the ship has not looked good this year. But, his value at this point is significantly higher than what Baylor's is. They've lost control of their destiny as soon as they got it. They had 3 games to end the year, where if they would have won out, they would have been in the conference championship. Game number 1, you drop it in embarrassing fashion to Kansas State. I think it was 38-3. That's not good. The alarm should definitely be going off in Waco. And while I didn't have this written down on my notes, I would like to propose just a little mini theory for you. So let's say Aranda gets a job at Arizona State. Let's say he goes to Arizona State. I don't know why I picked Arizona State. We'll just go with that. There is a certain former Baylor head coach that recently got fired by the Carolina Panthers that would be floating around. Would he go back to Baylor? Would Matt Rule go back to Baylor if that job opens up, if Aranda is swayed out of Waco? I don't know. Something to think about. Another, head coach that I think could potentially be looking for a way out, Mark Stoops at Kentucky. You guys remember all that talk back and forth that we had between him and Calipari on basketball school versus football school, and really kind of going at each other. That argument got settled. It settled itself. Kentucky lost to Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt has their first SEC win of the year over a then-ranked Kentucky Wildcats team. Give me things I did not see coming for 100, Alex. That was incredible. They did it. They finally got their SEC win. Vandy's been an easy team to like this year. It's been you can sell me pretty easily on them. Ultimate underdogs. Loved them coming out against Hawaii and really just giving them the business. That was awesome. I'm happy they got their SEC win, but man, what a gut punch to the Wildcats. I mean, that is the ultimate just tough loss. Just ultimate, what are we doing here? Levis had one of those games that we've seen from him, and it really hasn't seemed to affect his draft stock any, but whenever you see quarterbacks make those types of bad decisions and fail to really elevate his team at all, those are typically the types of games that ruin draft stocks. I don't know that his will be affected at all. He seems kind of like an untouchable at this point for whatever reason, but that's something that should absolutely come into play when you look at this game. Another kind of centric to the draft stock thing, I stand by the fact that Chris Rodriguez is a legit running back, a legit guy, and that he should be playing meaningful snaps on Sundays at some point because, good God, that kid can run the ball, and he continues to be almost the sole output for that offense because Will Levis, he's got a lot of talent, but he can't string anything together. So, Chris Rodriguez is the star of the show out there. It just sucks that the ship hasn't quite been piloted the way that a lot of us expected. Okay, so we've got two more topics that we're going to talk about before I let you go. The next one I want to talk about here is the ACC as a whole, as a collective. I gave North Carolina a little bit of praise earlier on. Now I want to kind of tear down the rest of the conference because we've talked about it a couple times. I think that the ACC has fallen off of a rather large cliff, something I predicted at the beginning of the season because Pitt, not particularly great. Clemson loss, Syracuse, they're gone now. You've got Wake Forest, who just lost and has just continuously been losing. NC State doesn't have Devin Leary, so you got to be wary of that. Florida State's hot. I give them that. Miami, embarrassing. There's a whole host of things you can focus on here. And I think kind of running through the list of teams that I think could be good eventually, but I'm not currently sold on it, I think you would be in the best interest of the ACC to maybe look to bolster their ranks and get in on some of that transferring in teams that we've been seeing across the country. What happens when Devin Leary, Sam Hartman, Drake May, some of these other guys that have really driven the success of their teams in the ACC, what happens when they leave? What do we do? Because do we feel confident that we can restock and get another Sam Hartman? Do we feel good that NC State can restock and get another Devin Leary? North Carolina keeps finding quarterbacks, so I'll leave them out of that. But, it's a continuous thing that's happening. I do feel all right about Florida State and Clemson moving forward. Maybe Miami. I still have a lot of faith in Mario Cristobal. I think he was dealt a bad hand. I don't know that Manny Diaz's roster there that he left was particularly great, and I think his strength is in recruiting, so we'll have to wait and see on that. But beyond those 3, maybe 4 teams, if you want to keep North Carolina in there, where are we? What are we looking at here? Obviously, I said that I'm thinking that transferring some teams in would be a good idea. Now, let me tell you who I'm thinking. I'm thinking maybe a team from the American in Eastern Carolina. Really bolster up on the Carolinas, and that's something you'll see here in just a second, because I would also check if App State and Coastal Carolina are interested. Now, Coastal's inclusion obviously implies that Jamie Chadwell stays at that job, because without him, I don't know where they go. I don't know that they can elevate above to go to the ACC from the Sun Belt. It already feels a little bit too rich for me, but those are 2 teams that I do think would make a potential difference, especially once they get kind of in the water and get a little bit more comfortable within the ACC. Adding more fish to the water doesn't always help the pond, but bolstering up here could be a good move for the Coast, especially when you're looking at the fact that just about every conference right now is either eating or going to be eaten. The American is one that you could absolutely pick the bones of because they just lost, three of their biggest money makers. So it's just things that you got to remain aware of. I think the ACC would be one of those that would stick around. I think the SEC would love to just kind of adopt it because a lot of those teams would still fit right in. Maybe you give a couple away to the Big 10 or the Big 12 or whatever. But, overall, you're kind of the most middling conference right now. You don't really seem like you want to buy into the big grouping and trying to consolidate. But I think it would be a smart move for them to go ahead and try for that. And the last one I want to talk about today. I saved this one because it's not really reflective of any one specific game. It's really two games and really the whole season that we've seen these two teams, talking about Michigan and Ohio State here. The closer we get to the college football playoffs, the more I'm coming around to the idea that Michigan is the best team in the Big Ten. I think that Ohio State could absolutely beat them. I'm not even necessarily saying that Michigan will beat Ohio State, but if you are a college football fan instead of an SEC supremacist or, a Georgia fan or what have you, I think you should be cheering for Michigan to beat Ohio State because I think they have the best chance within the teams that are currently projected to be in the playoffs. That's not including Tennessee because I do think Tennessee would have a better chance on a neutral site to beat Georgia. But, I do think that Michigan outside of the SEC has the best chance to beat the Bulldogs. The Wolverines have the offensive line, they have the running game, and they have the defense to give a better run of their money to Georgia. That's kind of a problem that we've seen so far. You have to have so many different layers and so many different moving pieces to really hang in there with the Bulldogs. I definitely don't think Ohio State has that. They don't look good up front. It's entirely passing. We saw that in the whatever game that was where it took them forever and a half to figure anything out. Michigan's just built better for tougher competition, something that could absolutely come into play when they play Ohio State because it's going to be hard to stop that front seven. It's going to be hard to get through that offensive line. We've seen what happens when great passing offenses play the Bulldogs. I mean, look at Tennessee. They looked lost out there. And while I do like the running backs, it's not the level in which you feel safe trusting them to, take over the game. Blake Corum can absolutely do that. This is more just driven by the fact that I grew up in the South, if you can't tell by the voice. I am from Arkansas, and I know how obnoxious SEC, supremacists can be because it's so just annoying that you get stuck in this microcosm of, well, we're the only people that can have good football or whatever. And, dude, I know how big football is in the South. I know that it's the biggest conference by far, but it's not like Clemson hasn't beaten Bama in the championships. It's not like Ohio State doesn't get there just about every year and make some kind of impact. If you want a potential non-SEC champion, you should be cheering for Michigan and whenever they eventually meet Ohio State because that is the team that can truly cause some damage if anyone in this country can truly cause damage to Georgia. So what do you think about the whole week? Was there any particular game that surprised you the most or something that you were really sure was going to happen one way or but it did in the other? Feel free to hop in the comments and let me know. But for now, that is episode 48 of the From My Perspective podcast. And as always, I'll see you next time.